Hi there, my name is Jonathan McIntosh, and in this video I would like to talk to you about how to write a formal university essay and what are the handy hints and then the top tips that can help you to get the best mark possible. So in this video we're going to try and cover three aims. We're going to outline approaches to writing academic essays, and then we're going to move on to talk about the importance of structure in relation to essay writing and how structure is really important because it helps to signpost and guide your reader through the points that you're trying to make. And as we go through, we're going to look at examples of good and bad essay writing so that you can become familiar with what we're really looking for as markers in terms of assessment. So, essays are a fact of life in a faculty of arts, and many music students have to write essays throughout their degrees. All good essays have several key points that you should really try to ensure that you have these points in all of the essays that you submit. The first and probably the most important point is to remember that we expect essays to answer the question or related questions or points or issues, particularly the question that's stated in the unit guide. So it's really important that you don't necessarily change the essay question without permission, because this is what we expect from all students. All essays should have a good thesis or a point to them. So in this essay I'm going to examine issues of X, Y and Z. And they should have an appropriate structure. Structure is so important to essay writing. It helps guide a reader, and even if there are issues to do with forms of academic writing, having a good structure, it's possible for the marker to see where you're going or where you're attempting to go. And also you need to include evidence or relevant examples in a good essay. You need to include references in order to help explain, support and substantiate the points that you wish to make. You can't have a good essay without including references in the text. So when I talk to students about essay writing, I really try to encourage students to start the essay early. You'll have the essay questions usually at the beginning of the semester in the unit guide, and you can start thinking about it from that point on. It's important that you decide on an essay question and that you then spend time defining any important terms or keywords or foreign terms that are important to the essay question, and that you analyse the tasks. So what is it that the question is really asking you to do? And once you can articulate that point, how do you then best go about answering the question? And of course, probably the best way to do that is to consult numerous sources. So to attend lectures or watch recordings of lectures online and take detailed notes. And these should be your first kind of port of call. Use sources that are listed in the unit outline. So these could be lecture readings or workshop readings or additional readings. Lecture documentary films, audio-visual recordings such as YouTube clips and sound recordings. Lecture PowerPoint presentations are also a really valuable source for your essay because they can help highlight the key points that your lecturers cover when they review the main arguments within the readings that form the basis of lectures. And also using the library catalogue to find additional sources will help you with this task. Sometimes students can be overwhelmed maybe with the research data that's returned when they search a library catalogue. So it's important that you develop skills to be able to skim read information, use abstracts or introductions and conclusions in sources in order to help gain a general idea of what the gist of a source is and whether it's useful to your assessment. Take notes when you do reading by bearing in mind the question at all times. Sometimes readings are very interesting and they include lots of different facts, but you might not need to include all of them or refer to all of them for a specific assignment. And as you're going through this process, it's really important that you keep a track of all the sources that you've consulted. I encourage students to keep a running list of works cited, where they include full references for all the works. And if you're taking notes from these sources, make sure that you number the pages that you take notes on, and that you also write down the page number of any paraphrase or quote that you take from the reading. This will help you in the long term when it comes to polishing off the essay, and there's nothing worse than having a really good quote but not being able to find the page number from where you took this quote to include it in the essay. So once you've done your preliminary research, it's really important to organise your ideas. And I encourage students to do this with pen and paper or pencil and paper, because I feel that this provides you with the opportunity to really kind of get your ideas out in a kind of very definite sense. And sometimes when you're staring in front of a blank screen on a computer, it can be quite challenging to do this. So you need to choose your essay question, understand, analyse what's been asked of you. Then from this point you need to generate ideas that will help you look for and source resources, and these resources will then help generate more ideas. These ideas will then help you to create an outline, and again, doing this on paper is actually a very beneficial way to go about creating an outline. Many students do spider diagrams or make lists of ideas in order to do this. So that's kind of step one, which is the planning stage. Planning is really important to help you understand and gain a good grasp on the ideas that you're going to be writing about, and why you're going to write about these ideas and how they relate to the topic. The next step is to draft the essay. When I talk to students about this stage, I tend to encourage students not to necessarily start with the introduction. Of course, it's fine to go ahead and kind of put together a draft of the introduction, but don't get fixated on trying to get this correct the first time. Sometimes it might be useful to work on various sections of the essay and then actually come back to the introduction as maybe the last thing that you write, because by this time you will understand the content or the body of your essay and how it's moving towards the conclusion. And once you're in this kind of situation, then you're in a much better place to go back and hone the introduction to make sure that it tells the reader exactly what you're going to do. And there's no getting away from it, that very few people have the skills to be able to write a very good essay on the first go. So writing an essay actually means that you have to redraft it numerous times. And this will help you to refine the overall outline and the message you're trying to communicate. And as you redraft the essay, you're then revising. So you're editing as you go. You're editing for language, syntax, sentence structure, the length of sentences. You're editing in order to include references, short quotes, and in-text citations. And then once when you get to the stage of almost having a pretty good draft, then you move towards proofreading. So then you read the essay aloud at this stage, or you get someone to proofread it for you. And then finally, when you're happy with the essay, then you can move towards submission. So writing an essay is actually a very complicated process, and there are several steps involved. So don't leave writing the essay to the last minute. It only causes stress and confusion. So when it comes to structuring your essay, as a marker, we are looking for specific things. We're looking for an introduction in which you outline the question and then go on to interpret or identify the focus or the purpose of the essay. In doing this, therefore, you're actually telling the reader in your own words how you interpret the question, and then you're outlining the scope of the essay. It's very important that you then state a thesis. So a thesis is the point that you're trying to make in this essay, and tell the reader, after you've stated the point that you're trying to make, why you are making this point. This is really important. And after you've then told us why you have adopted this thesis, you can then go on to say how the structure of the essay will help you to answer this question or address this point, address the thesis. So this is where you can kind of say, to begin, the essay first examines issues of X, Y, and Z in order to investigate such and such. Following, the essay then examines A, B, and C in order to do something else. Finally, the essay then addresses issues of D, E, and F before moving on towards the conclusion. So you set up very clearly what it is that you're going to do, how you understand the question, what the point of the essay is, and what the structure of the essay is. So the reader is now expecting to see that structure as we move through the essay. So we move from the introduction then to the body, and this is where you kind of flesh out the kind of supporting material and develop a train of thought that helps you answer the thesis that you've set for yourself. So there should be several paragraphs in the overall body of the essay. Each paragraph should be well developed, so not just a series of 2 or 3 lines. That indicates to a reader that the ideas are not very well developed and there hasn't really been a lot of thought gone into the essay. So each paragraph should start with a topic sentence that helps introduce the idea that's going to be discussed. Each paragraph should then also address one issue. So don't try to address too many things in a paragraph. After you've stated the topic sentence, then include supporting details, which can include in-text references, some short quotes, and then you conclude the sentence in some type of way by drawing together the point. And sophisticated essays use a concluding sentence as a means to link to the following topic sentence. And by doing this, you create a much better sense of flow to the essay, and it helps communicate a better sense of sophistication with academic writing. So you should tend to do this for each of the paragraphs that you're using. And then once you get to the conclusion, you should restate the summary. So remind the reader about what the point or the question that you're addressing, and then you should start to summarize the main points that have helped formulate your argument. Don't just replicate the introduction. So in the introduction it would be the essay will do this, the essay will do something else. And then in the conclusion say the essay has examined this and the essay has examined something else. Try to move beyond this, and this will help you to get more marks. Following, you should have a reference list or a list of works cited. This should be on a separate page following the conclusion, and references should be listed A to Z alphabetically by author, not by format. It's something that it just kind of annoys markers when they see this, so make sure that sources are listed A to Z according to the author's surname. If you follow the structure, you make your markers' job so much easier, and they focus more on the content rather than worrying about the structure of the essay. So, the introduction should grab the reader's attention. You're telling them a story, in effect, and you want to communicate this story in a really kind of exciting and dynamic way. An academic essay doesn't have to sound academic. So imagine the best kind of stories that you were told as a child. So once upon a time in a land far, far away, there lived such and such a character in such and such a context. This is a good way of setting up your essay and inviting the reader in. Present them with the thesis in this manner. And helpful beginnings are, this essay is about gamelan music, or this essay is about Indian music, or even worse, I'm writing to tell you about X, Y, and Z. It's just, the language is kind of boring, it's not very exciting to the reader. So grab our attention. And really avoid vague introductory sentences. You've got a limited word count, so you want to make every word count. And this is where being able to use language in a really concise but creative way and an accessible way helps your reader to understand your points. So avoid saying things like music is important in many sub-Saharan cultures. That's what this essay is going to talk about. That's not going to inspire your reader and make them sit up and go, oh wow, this sounds really interesting, I'm going to enjoy this essay. Because that's what you should really want to make your reader think at this point. Introductions are so effective. Imagine you go for a job interview. You really want this job, but you turn up in a t-shirt, shorts and thongs. Now, for some jobs, like if you want to be a lifeguard, that might be alright. But first impressions really matter. And so really focus on the introduction and try and get it into as best a shape as you can. So here's an example of an introductory paragraph. On March the 4th, 1849, John Smith was born to Anna, Bradcock Smith and James Smith. Although clearly not of humble origins, John was acquainted with several prominent and influential men of politics with whom he discussed matters of mathematics, history, science, law and theology. Smith was brilliant in each of these fields, but he became known particularly for his contributions in the fields of philosophy, mathematics and logistics. This essay will not only shed light on some of Smith's theories and words regarding these three areas, but will also tell of the events in his life that made him the man that he was. So this is an essay that comes from Kimberly Chapman, who has an amazing essay writing site that you might want to go and look at. So we don't necessarily know about John Smith, this has nothing to do with music, but we're looking at it in terms of the mechanics of essay writing. So it starts by telling us about who John Smith was. It provides us with his date of birth, and it then goes from the general towards the specific information. So we're told that he didn't come from humble origins and that he was into politics, and then he discussed several different issues including mathematics, history, science, law, logic and theology. And although he was brilliant in these fields, he then became known for his contributions to a select number of fields, philosophy, mathematics and logistics. So you can see there that the author is narrowing down the focus of the essay to focus on these fields, and then the essay tells us what it's actually going to do and how it's going to do it. So it's going to tell us about his theories and words, and it's also going to tell us about a bit of his background and how this links into these theories. So your introduction might be a bit longer than this, but as you can see, this is a good example of what an introduction should do. It sets up shop, it tells the reader what the essay is about, what the thesis is, and how it's going to do that in terms of structure. And you can say this essay will, or you could say in this essay I will examine. I don't mind in students who include the pronoun I, but be careful that you don't become too colloquial in your language. When we move on to talk about the paragraphs in the body of the essay, again, try to relate each paragraph one to the next in some type of fashion. It really demonstrates to the reader that you've put in a lot of thought and effort making these connections or these links that are so important in order to help language gain a better sense of flow. So when we talk about connections or links or relating each paragraph, we're talking about various forms of articulation. And imagine if you've got a nice kind of legato phrase in a piece of music, and then you need to connect one phrase to the next. If there's lots of staccato notes or stopping and starting, it's not going to help the essay, or they're not going to help the music achieve that sense of flow. The same is true of an introduction. If you want to use subheadings, that can be very important, and it can also be extremely useful to help guide your reader. It can help to also break up the prose and provide a segue between all the different sections. Each paragraph should address one main point, and you should develop this point fully. So no short paragraphs of 2 or 3 lines. As markers, we really hate to see these points. So although each paragraph addresses one point, you can then use sub-points to help you address this main point. And when I encourage students to do plans of essays, I ask them to come up with overall points to be addressed in paragraphs, and then to jot down sub-points underneath the main point. And then with this in the plan, they can then move on to use these points in order to develop sentences to create a full paragraph. So here's an example from paragraph 1 of the next essay, in the essay about John Smith. So, Smith was born in Scotland to Amelia and John MacLeod. A plague in 1850 killed Amelia and John, leaving 2-year-old John an orphan. With no nearby relatives, John was placed in an orphanage where he was luckily discovered by Nancy and Arthur Smith. The Smiths were a couple visiting Scotland for Arthur's research on castles. The orphanage happened to be housed in what had once been a castle, and the Smiths fell in love with the precocious John while there. They took the child back to the US with them in 1860. So this paragraph is used to provide a lot of kind of background or biographical information about John Smith, and we learn about his parents and how he came to move from Scotland to the United States. It also includes an in-text reference. So in this circumstance, the in-text reference is written by a superwriter in 1980, and the various information in this paragraph is taken from pages 4 to 7 from this source. So again, the main point could be John Smith's background, and then there are several other points that are used to develop this idea. Moving on. According to both superwriter and door knocker, 1985, Smith never married, apparently choosing instead to bury himself in his passion, widget watching. As will be discussed in the next section, he may have had some friends in the New York group, but his complete absorption into his studies resulted in him being a sad, bitter old man in his later years. Door knocker, 1985. Page 39. His death in 1902 was long thought to have been caused by a heart attack, superwriter 1980-86, but recent research indicates that he may have in fact committed suicide by swallowing some widgets. Door knocker 1985-39. So you can see in this paragraph, the author creates a really very good link, because in the last page we finished with superwriter, okay, and we paraphrased some information from this source. And then according to superwriter, that helps create continuity in the link. And we're also adding another source in order to help substantiate the point. So according to superwriter and door knocker, and then we get more biographical information. So this paragraph is extending the biographical information on John Smith. And we've also got a direct quote when it says, had some friends in the New York group, but his, quote, complete absorption into the studies resulted in him being a sad, bitter old man in his later years. Close quote, and then the in-text reference. So that quote really runs very well in that paragraph, and that's another thing to remember when you include quotes in formal essays. Make sure that they actually fit the syntax that you're using. So if you're writing in the present tense, make sure your quote is in the present tense. If it's in the past tense, it just shows kind of a lack of understanding of how to embed quotes. And then we've got 2 more kind of paraphrases or the use of in-text references in order to support points in this paragraph. Then we've got another 2 paragraphs. Smith's involvement with the New York widget watchers provided him with continual funding. and may have also served as a surrogate family in his later years. Superwriter states that Smith's comrades in New York were closer to him than anybody else, including family. New evidence, however, indicates that if the relationship with the New York Association once was harmonious, it eventually decayed. Doorknocker has unearthed memos from the group dated shortly before Smith's death in 1902 that make mention of the possibility of throwing him out of their ranks due to increasing drunkenness. A particular unpleasant display at the group's Christmas party may have been the last straw. So these are slightly shorter paragraphs, but we continue to learn more about Smith, his involvement with widget watching, and that you can see the use of another direct quote in paragraph 3 and a paraphrase in paragraph 4. And I really like how in paragraph 4 that it starts with, we're told that about Smith's comrades in New York, etc., etc., and the notion of family. But then chapter 4 kind of disputes this fact by saying, new evidence, however, indicates that if the relationship with the New York Association was once harmonious, etc., etc. So the use of however as a transition word is very important. And then when you're creating links, utilize various transition words. Don't use them all the time because they can become repetitive and kind of overwork the language. But if you know how to use them really well, they can really help bring your language alive. In paragraph 5, although it is not a certain fact, it is reasonable to consider the possibility that Smith did not commit suicide because of his impending loss of financial and scholarly support. It is true, it indicates how, if this is true, it indicates how deeply passionate Smith was about widget watching. If he could not continue his studies and was separated from his colleagues, he seemingly felt that he had no reason to live. So this is picking up from the idea at the end of paragraph 5, where it's really saying that it's talking about the death of Smith, okay? Whereas paragraph 5 goes on to say, well, maybe this wasn't suicide then because of drunkenness. Again, I'm not using this essay as an example of how to write a music essay, but I'm using this essay as a way to help develop paragraph ideas, demonstrate linking between paragraphs, demonstrate that each paragraph has a main point with subpoints that help communicate the story that you're trying to tell the reader through the essay. And we've seen examples in most paragraphs. Paragraph 5 is perhaps an exception of in-text references being used in each paragraph to help support, explain, or substantiate points in the story. So once you've then talked about the main points in the body of the paragraph and kind of included the points that you want to include in the story, that is the essay, you then need to bring the various strands together in the essay and to write a conclusion that is well grounded in the main points that are said in the body of the essay. This is really important. Students can often be disappointed with essays because their conclusions don't bring everything together. They're not well grounded. They don't refer back to the points raised in the introduction and also the points that are developed throughout the essay. So it has to be, the conclusion has to be a logical ending to the story. It has to refer back to the introduction and the points that are developed in the body of the essay. It needs to bring all this information together. And this is what makes writing an effective conclusion thought-provoking work. It's not impossible, and sometimes it's difficult, but a really good conclusion is your last opportunity to make a final impact on your reader, to make your reader go, wow, this is a really well-constructed essay. Never introduce new information into the conclusion. It's a way to lose marks, and it just shows that there are problems with structuring the essay. You can go beyond the points in some type of a way when you are summarising, but don't introduce a new topic or a new reference that you haven't really used in the text before. So, when you're structuring the conclusion, it can be nice to have a link to the previous paragraph. So you could begin the sentence by referring back to the main subject that's discussed in the body of the essay. Link back to the thesis that's stated in the introduction. You can also indicate to the reader that this is the conclusion. We are coming to the end, and you can do this with a subheading, a simple subheading that just says conclusion, or in conclusion, or in summary. These are techniques to signal that you are coming to the end, and these are the final words on the subject. Be brief in your conclusion. Don't go on and on, but don't necessarily be so brief that you don't cover the main points in the issues. Reinforce the thesis statement. Tell the reader what you've done and how you've said these points. This gives a greater sense of unity to the essay. So here are some examples of concluding paragraphs. The first one is a bad example. From all this, it is clear that John Smith changed the life of widget watching by inventing the widgetoscope. My life is enriched for knowing about this wonderful man in his amazing field. John Smith will forever be remembered as the greatest widget watcher that ever lived. As a marker, when we read things like this, we just go, oh no. We really don't want to know your opinion, okay? And sometimes, unless it's explicitly asked for, don't really voice your opinion in essays, or I didn't like this essay topic, or couldn't find materials, etc., etc. Use the argument, the points that you put forward in the essay and the sources that you've used in order to articulate the point that you want to make, articulate your argument. You can have a point of view in essays, but you use sources in order to articulate this fact. You avoid saying, I think, I didn't like this, and avoid saying things like, I've learned so much from writing this essay, I feel very enriched or whatever. We don't want to read that as a marker. We want to see that you can draw the various strands together. So if we look at the good example, in conclusion, John Smith's contributions changed the field of widget watching. His widgetoscope helped to turn previously vague theories into provable laws of widgetry. Smith may have suffered loneliness and an ultimate death due to his dedication to his studies, but the field today recognises him as one of history's great widget watchers. So here's an example of the conclusion using in conclusion, or you could use in summary, as a means to signal to the reader, we're coming to the end now. So this communicates to the reader that they really want to see the thesis restated, and they want to see you wrapping up the main points. Okay? Use the introduction to tell the reader what you are going to say, what the thesis is, and how you are going to say it. This outlines the structure. In the body of the essay, then say these points in the order that they were discussed in the introduction. Following, in the conclusion, restate the thesis, go back and summarize the points in the order that they were mentioned in the essay, and you can go beyond these points if you wish to. This creates a really clear structure that helps to communicate your ideas. So even if you might not have the best formal written language skills, if you have a really cracking structure, okay, this can help communicate your ideas. And it can give you extra marks. And the marker might say, well, there are issues to do with language that could be improved. How overall the structure really helps this essay to hang together, and it deserves such and such a mark. So don't overlook structure, and don't overlook refining structure and using links and maybe tweaking language as you are working on the essay in the editing and proofing stage. Of course, you have to use sources and sometimes quotations in order to help support the points that you are trying to make in an essay. You can't just write an essay and have a list of works cited after the conclusion. You need to include in-text references in the text. So quoting sources is a really important part of the skill of essay writing, and it's an ingredient that we look for in the entire mix of an essay. Referencing, the use of quotes and in-text referencing helps to guard against plagiarism. So it indicates to the reader that you are aware of sources, you have done research, and that you're not just lifting ideas and trying to pass them off as your own. In saying this, markers really dislike seeing a string or a bunch of quotations strung together, one after the other. It shows that you haven't necessarily understood the research, or it demonstrates that you haven't developed paraphrasing skills, so the ability to put quotations in your own words and then include an in-text reference to back that up. We really don't want to see long quotes in short essays, so avoid indenting quotes at all costs, and if you can use a section of a quote, say a section from a sentence, rather than the entire sentence, please do that. It helps you to develop a better sense of flow. If you paraphrase a comment or a quote, so put it into your own words, please remember to cite it. By putting the quote into your own words, it doesn't make it your idea. Okay, you've got to show that you've taken ideas from other people. Of course, you can have your own ideas, but if you paraphrase the work of others, you must cite it. You must include the reference. And the essay should reflect the interpretation of your sources. So sometimes the unit guide asks you to include a certain number of sources. Of course, you are free to include more sources than the minimum that's cited, but try to include at least one or two in-text citations or quotes, paraphrases in each paragraph. If you don't do this, it really looks like laziness on the part of the writer, and it sets off alarm bells in the marker's head when they're marking. So again, it's something else for the marker to worry about in terms of what mark am I going to give this, instead of, if you use quotations and paraphrases in a very good way, the marker has no problem when they read your work. So for these essays, we ask you to use in-text referencing. So when you quote from an author or you cite a specific idea, you should use an in-text reference. This is different to footnote referencing, and please use the correct form of referencing. It's very important. You might think, why is this important? But the ability to follow instructions and the ability to pay attention to detail is really important in terms of academic written work, as it is just as important when you are performing a piece of music or writing a composition or working in a studio context. If you don't get the details right, the piece doesn't come alive. And in-text referencing is a really good way to show that you have conducted thorough research, that you know how to handle the basics of essay writing. So you can have direct quotations or citations such as Blacking, 1973, page 10, states that music is humanly organised sound. Or you can have a paraphrase, which is the next example on the screen. Bach, 1984, 124 to 25, notes that secrecy is a social mechanism. Or you can have another form of paraphrase where you don't actually use the author as the subject of the sentence. So the study of dance remains a subject of investigation planted firmly on the periphery of ethnomusicological inquiry. This is paraphrasing work by Jane Desmond, and we include the reference at the end of the sentence. Direct quotations should be enclosed within single quotation marks, as in the example of Blacking states that music is humanly organised sound. Look, if you want to include double quotation marks, that's absolutely fine. Personally, I think single quotation marks looks cleaner, But if you are reading sources published by American publishers, you will see that they use double quotation marks because that's just common practice in North America. If you are using a longer quote, that's around 35 words, then you need to indent the quote without quotation marks and put it in size 10 font. But again, try to avoid this in a short essay. You don't really want to have long quotes. At the end of your essay, following the conclusion, and then after the conclusion you cite the word limit or the word count for your essay. After the conclusion, the word count, and then on a separate page you include the works cited. The works cited must include all the sources that you cite in the essay. Not all the sources that you have read for the essay, only the sources that you have cited in text. This is very important, and it shows again an understanding of the academic referencing process and shows your ability to adhere to instructions and follow details. You need to use the ethnomusicology author date, not author state, referencing system. I should really proofread my PowerPoints, and this is available via the Monash Education and the Monash Library by the music guide. So works cited should be on a separate page and list the works cited A to Z by author's surname. Don't group references by format, i.e. books, journals or articles. Group them all together by the author's surname. Again, it's a final impression that you leave with the marker in terms of the references cited, and really good references can have an impact of, in some circumstances, as much as 5% in terms of the mark. So that's half a grade band. So make sure that you leave enough time to look at the referencing guide, the ethnomusicology author date guide, and edit the references. Get a friend to do that for you, then you can edit their references as well. Here are 3 common sources for works cited: a single authored book, a chapter from an edited book, and a journal article. There are many other types of sources that you may cite in the essay, and most of these are included in the referencing guide for ethnomusicology, which is available on the Monash website. So, we've talked about many different things in this video presentation, but I hope it's given you a better understanding of how to go about planning the essay, structure the essay, and from the examples we've used of John Smith and widget watching, giving you some tips and pointers for linking between paragraphs, developing paragraphs with a main point and subpoints, and how to conclude the essay. So, formal essay writing is a skill that requires careful and diligent development and practice. It's just like playing an instrument, singing, composing a piece of music, creating a work in a studio environment. It's a key skill that all musicians need to be able to do. If you have excellent written expression, you will stand out in terms of job interviews and applications. The structure of the essay is crucial. It helps to guide the reader. It helps to set up shop, introduce your story, tells your story in a very dynamic way, and helps draw your story together in terms of the essay. And I use the term story throughout this presentation, not in a negative fashion to downplay essay writing, but the best forms of academic writing are clear. They tell a story. They take the reader on a journey. It's not... The point of academic writing is not to necessarily sound academic for academics, for the sake of academia. If you can use a shorter word, use it. It'll have more impact. It'll be more pithy. And the last and most important point that I say to many students, whether they're first year students or honours students or even PhD students, start work on the essay or your form of writing sooner rather than later. Don't leave it to the night before or a couple of days before. It will cause undue stress. You want to manage this process. You wouldn't commence learning a piece of music, writing a composition, or working on a studio piece of work the night before. It wouldn't lead to a very successful result. So take time over this, and this will help you to get the best mark that you can for this assessment.